My name is Yegor, and here, in this moment as I kneel before the blade that will seal my fate, I want to tell how it all began. I was a servant in the castle of Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of all Russia, a man whose cruelty and sensitivity were as vast as the empire he built. I was taken to Ivan's castle in the dead of winter when Russia's snow seems to cover the entire world with its shroud of death. Ivan IV, as he was formerly called, was already a living legend of terror in our country. They said he had killed his own son in a fit of rage. He ordered tortures as if they were mere pastimes, watching his enemies be torn apart slowly as he died. His very title, the Terrible, wasn't a mere exaggeration. He was not just a harsh ruler, he was an executioner, a monster, a man who seemed to have made a pact with the devil himself. I knew all this when I was taken to the castle. But what I didn't know was that within that castle, the stories were darker than anyone could imagine. The castle, built in Moscow, was breathtaking, but not with admiration, with fear. The walls, so thick they muffled the screams of the tortured, seemed to be covered in shadows that danced even without light. Right at the entrance, huge statues of warriors stood watch, their stone eyes seeming to follow your every movement. They said these warriors were souls Ivan had captured in battle and turned into stone through a pact with a sorcerer. From the very first day, something was wrong. I was assigned to maintain the cleanliness and organization of the banquet hall, a hall so vast that it seemed to swallow the light of the torches. There, Tsar Ivan presided over feasts with his most loyal men, the Oprichniki, a private guard that terrorized Russia in his name, dressing in black and carrying ferocious dogs with them, along with emblems of dog heads, symbols of loyalty to the Tsar. Their presence made the air heavier, as if the darkness itself took shape. I heard stories from the other servants. On nights with a full moon, he wandered the castle corridors, muttering words in ancient language that no one understood. Some said he spoke to the shadows, that he bargained with spirits to maintain his power. There was a legend about a secret room, a room where he made a pact with a spirit called Kashai, an immortal being who, in exchange for human lives, offered forbidden knowledge. I didn't want to believe it, but something was wrong in the castle. Something was breathing. One night, I was called to the Tsar's quarters. The atmosphere was icy, the fire in the hearth seemed incapable of warming the room. Ivan sat before a table, holding an old, stained piece of parchment. His eyes, as cold and merciless as the Russian winter itself, fixed on me. Yegor, he murmured, and his tone was too soft for the terror it evoked. You know the price of failure. He smiled, and at that moment, I saw the outlines of something moving in the shadows around him. They weren't guards, they weren't human. Something hissed, and I felt the chill of death on my neck. Oh, Tsar, I would never fail. I stammered, but he laughed, a low sound, almost amused, as if my plea was that of a child. We shall see, he said, handing me a small object, a rag doll. This is you, he continued, and before I could ask what he meant, he squeezed the doll in his hands. I screamed. A searing pain, a crushing in my chest, as if the very air was being sucked from my lungs. I collapsed to my knees, breathless. Ivan released the doll, and the pain stopped. He leaned over me, his eyes boring into mine. Never disappoint me, Igor. I returned to my quarters that night, but sleep wouldn't come. The legends and whispers became more real. On my pillow, I found strands of hair that weren't mine, and I saw scratch marks on the wood of my door, marks that hadn't been there before. The other servants were changing too, their faces pale, eyes always wide, as if expecting to see something terrible at any moment. Have you heard about the ghosts? A collie whispered once, staring blankly ahead. They were the first to fall to Ivan's hands, and now they can't leave. One night, returning from my duties, I saw something I will never forget. In the castle gardens, where statues of saints had been replaced by grotesque stone figures, I saw a woman, pale, with long, tangled hair, dressed in rags. She was crying, but her cry made no sound. When our eyes met, she opened her mouth in a silent scream, and I saw she had no tongue. Terrified, I ran inside, but no matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't shake her image from my mind. And then I started dreaming of her. Every night she appeared, each time closer. Her lips formed the words, but no voice emerged. Sweating and panicking, I found the doll Ivan had given me. Now it was stained with dried blood. Then came the fateful day. I was summoned once more to the throne room. There was Ivan, holding my doll, now dyed a deep red. "You saw her, didn't you?" Ivan asked. I didn't respond. "Oh, Yegor, there are so many things you don't know." He looked at me with a smile of pure delight, and it's too late to learn. I was dragged to the execution hall, and the executioner raised the blade. "Ivan never dies," whispered the man beside me. "He takes the blood of those who perish and starts again always." When the blade finally fell, there was a brief moment of silence, as if time itself had stopped, but I didn't feel death. Instead, I am here, back on the first day, walking through the corridors, the fear growing. I will never leave this place. Maybe Ivan is right. Maybe he never dies. And maybe I will never be free.
On a winter twilight in 1582, my name was Malcolm Murray, one of the closest advisors to James IV. My role, they say, was to manage the kingdom's finances, ensuring the coffers of Edinburgh Castle remained full and that the king had everything he desired. But life at court wasn't just numbers and coins. It was the whisper of old legends echoing through the stone corridors, the shadows that danced along the walls, the oppressive weight of history. Edinburgh Castle was a sleeping giant haunted by memories that echoed through the windy nights. Stories told by soldiers and servants were enough to chill the blood. Prisoners who vanished, moans from the dungeons, ghosts of fallen warriors wandering in search of justice. There was something more, a shadow that seemed to stretch into every corner of the castle, something unseen but felt deep within the soul. One night, the king summoned me in secret. "Malcolm," he whispered, "I have seen something." His eyes were dim, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He spoke of a spirit that visited him at night, a female figure dressed in rags, her skin pale and eyes empty. He knew, as did I, the tales of the White Lady, a spectre wandering the halls, eternally trapped in mourning over her execution hundreds of years ago within those very walls. And yet, there was something more in James's eyes, something that hinted this was no ordinary legend. I assured him I would investigate thoroughly, although in my heart, a sense of unease was already growing. The first presentiment occurred as I descended into the crypts, where an unnatural chill enveloped me, as if the air itself refused to touch my skin. There I found an old manuscript abandoned, its pages yellowed by time. As I opened it, a single word seemed to pulse in red: Decade, Gaelic for seek or follow. My fingers trembled as I touched the page, and for a moment I saw, oh God, I saw the figure of the king himself reflected in a puddle of water that didn't exist, with his eyes gouged out and mouth agape in an eternal scream. In the following days, I dedicated myself to further investigation. The reports were numerous but vague. They said the White Lady was merely a shadow of a greater horror, something dating back to ancient times when pagan rituals were performed on the castle stones to appease a hungry entity. The more I read, the more I felt that this story was far more than a mere legend. Something was awakening, something that craved blood, that demanded sacrifice. The second presentiment came during a morning walk through Edinburgh's markets. I was distracted, lost in my thoughts, when a gypsy approached me. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "The moon will reflect your soul, counselor, and when you see your face in the darkness, it will be too late." Her tone was serious, threatening. Those words stayed with me, crawling through my mind like serpents in the dark. The final night arrived. The king summoned me once more, pale as death, and spoke of what he had seen. She was there, Malcolm, inside the mirror. She showed me my future. James was trembling, sweat dripping down his forehead. Cautiously, I asked him to take me to the mirror. It was an ancient artifact kept in the deepest part of the castle, where the air seemed heavier. The moment I entered the room, a chill ran down my spine. The walls seemed to vibrate, pulsing with some strange energy. When I looked into the mirror, I felt my heart stop for a second. There was no reflection, only emptiness. And then I saw a movement behind me. Oh no! I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The king stood pale, his eyes fixed on the mirror. And then she appeared, the White Lady. Not as an ethereal ghost, but as flesh and blood, her face twisted into a mask of agony. She looked at me, her hollow eyes burning into my soul, and whispered, "The cycle must be completed." The door behind us slammed shut, locking us inside. The king tried to run, but I was paralyzed, hypnotized by the figure that now approached us. She didn't walk, no. She floated, as if the ground was unworthy of her touch. When she reached out to the mirror, its liquid surface turned to blood, dripping down the walls. The truth then hit me like a cold blade. I was next. I was to be the sacrifice. The manuscript, the warnings, the gypsy's words, they all pointed to this moment. No, I screamed, trying to open the door, but it was useless. James began muttering prayers, but his words were incoherent, fragmented. Despair swallowed us whole. The lady approached and touched my forehead. All of a sudden, I felt the weight of the castle's entire history. Every soul, every death, every drop of blood spilled. She didn't just want my body. She wanted my essence, my very existence, to feed her eternal torment. A voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't the lady's voice, it was my own. You always knew, Malcolm. You always knew this moment would come. And in a flash, I realized that I had made a pact long before becoming an advisor. I was the one responsible for the curse, for that entity's hunger centuries ago. And this was my end, a death destined since the dawn of time. Without warning, the mirror cracked, and on the other side I saw my reflection. But it wasn't me. It was the king, with the same terrified gaze, and in his face I saw the smile of the White Lady. She was me. I was her, trapped in an endless cycle of pain and madness. In the final moment, as the mirror shattered, I was pulled into it. The world around me dissolved into darkness and cold, and all that remained was the sound of my own screams echoing in the depths of Edinburgh Castle. I never left that place, never, and I'm sure I shall not.
In the heart of Bohemia, surrounded by dense forests and rugged mountains, stands Karst Castle, a dark testament to a past filled with tragedy. The town of Český Krumlov sprawls at the foot of the castle, where cobblestone streets echo stories of love and death, mingling with the aroma of bustling markets filled with spices and fresh bread. It was a cloudy autumn morning in 1445 when I decided to explore the castle's corridors, steeped in so many legends. As a monk of the Benedictine order, my life was filled with hours of meditation and prayer. However, the monotony had become unbearable, and the desire to unravel the mysteries surrounding Karst consumed me. There were rumours of Countess Beatrix, a woman accused of witchcraft, who met her tragic end at the stake, her last words crying out for justice. Upon entering the castle, a wave of cold swept over me. "Oh, how treacherous time can be," I murmured, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Each step toward the Tower of Chains seemed to resonate with echoes of despair, as if the castle itself wanted to warn me of the horrors hidden in its shadows. In the tower, the smell of dampness and decay enveloped my senses. The chains, which legends said still rattled at night, were a heavy presence. As I examined the stone walls, I discovered a hidden niche where a series of grotesquely stitched rag dolls were piled. Their button eyes seemed to follow my movements. There, I found a worn diary. The pages, yellowed and faded, spoke of Beatrix's final hours and an obscure ritual she had performed in a desperate attempt to escape her fate. Death is not the end, she had written in shaky letters, but a new beginning. The phrase reverberated in my mind, leaving a growing sense of dread. Abruptly, a sound echoed behind me, a soft scratching, as if something was moving. The chains on the walls began to rattle, and a shadow took shape in the dim light. It was the figure of Beatrix, no longer a victim but a vengeful entity. "You seek the truth, but the truth is a burden," she whispered, her eyes glowing with a supernatural intensity. An uncontrollable urge compelled me to ask, "How can I free you?" She smiled, a disturbing expression that mixed pain with satisfaction. "Only a sacrifice can break the cycle," she declared, pointing to the dolls. "Their eyes must be returned to the earth from which they came." Confused and terrified, I realized the dolls represented the townsfolk, souls that had vanished. The need for sacrifice tormented me. "Oh no, I can't do that," I shouted, but the pressure of Beatrix's presence was overwhelming. In a moment of clarity, I understood. It wasn't me who needed to sacrifice. The castle and its legends demanded not the death of a life, but the revelation of hidden truths. "Free yourself," I cried to Beatrix. "The truth need not claim more blood." The chains stopped rattling, and Beatrix's shadow hesitated, her expression confused. It was then I realized the energy enveloping the castle was dissipating. The air grew lighter, and the oppressive presence began to fade. With one last cry, her figure dissolved into a cloud of smoke, and the dolls fell, their button eyes shattering. Beatrix's freedom did not come through death, but through acceptance of her past. I, on the other hand, did not escape unscathed. As I left the tower, I felt a part of me slip away into the castle's shadows. My memories became fragments, like echoes of distant voices. I had broken the cycle of pain, but the experience had transformed me. I was now a guardian of Karst's legends, a storyteller walking between the living and the dead, carrying the weight of truth. As I walked away, the whispers of the castle still echoed in my mind, and I knew that, even outside its walls, its story would never be forgotten. The castle, with all its tragedies, now inhabited my being, and perhaps, one day, I too would find my place among the shadows.